And we've got the little red button. Great. Okay, so welcome to everyone who has joined us. My name is Kelia Silvis. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Vice President of the University of Minnesota's School of Public Health Student Senate, or SPHSS. The School of Public Health community prioritizes health equity. So the SPHSS is making it our priority too. In partnership with the School of Public Health's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team, we are hosting the Structural Oppression Seminar, or SOS series this spring to shine a light on how systems of structural oppression impact the real day-to-day work of public health. So to kick off the SOS series, I am just thrilled to introduce Julie Guidry. Julie has worked in the disability and nonprofit communities since 1997. She's the co-founder and executive director of Upstream Arts, which is an innovative nonprofit organization which uses arts to develop the social and communication skills of individuals with disabilities. Founded in 2006, Upstream Arts has rapidly become an emerging cross-sector leader in the intersection of disability, arts, and learning. Julie and her husband, Matt, conceived of Upstream Arts after seeing the positive impact of the arts on their son's self-expression and communication with those around him. Upstream Arts now annually works with 100+ partners and serves 5,000+ people of all ages and abilities. And during the upheaval of 2020, Julie and Upstream Arts continue to innovate, centering the needs of their communities in a time of crisis. And I'm just gonna pass it to her and let her take it away.
Thank you so much for that. It's so nice to be here. I really appreciate that. So Kelia, I've shared that my name is Julie Guidry. I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director. Just a couple of things. There is closed captioning available if you click on the live transcript at the bottom of this. That's great, nice little added feature is yeah, just a nice little access point. I'm also, as we go through, I'm going to be describing my slides. And so if there's anybody that has a need or just sort of benefits from having that audio description, we're going to go ahead and just make sure that that is a piece. And then at some point, Kelia will go ahead and drop my PDF of this slide deck. And so you're welcome to follow along that way as well, if that makes the most sense. But before we begin, I just invite you to sort of do a couple of things. Find yourself as comfortable as you can in a space that makes sense to you. Place your feet flat on the floor. And if you would, just join with me and find a breath, and let's just share that together. In, and if you choose, out. I'm going to take 2 more breaths. Feel free to do that if you choose. In, load out. And the last one. Thank you. I actually invite everybody to join me in that breath work, just because I need it. It helps me just to kind of get myself grounded and centered. And I think having the choice to be able to do that is a great sort of practice here. So let's jump right in, shall we? I want to just share very quickly this great definition that we found about ableism. So society is designed for and supportive of people alone, for inaccessible buildings and modes of communication to pervasive employment discrimination. Modern societies have been built in ways that often systematically oppress, discriminate against, and stigmatize those who are not able-bodied. So there's a word for that, and that word is ableism. We're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to talk a lot about how the work and the creative practice in the arts, which is what I do with the organization that I get to run, really looks at how do we think about disrupting ableism. So I want to just share and get us kind of all on the same level document here. So the next couple of slides that we're sharing, it's just blue slide in the right corner. It's a paint swipe with the word myth written in it. And I'm just going to read specifically what each of these slides states. And these are all myths that I think are great for us just to kind of start wrapping our heads around. So people with disabilities want or need to be cured is a myth. If you live with a disability, you're sick, you have a disease, you are in pain, and you are suffering. It's a myth. You cannot be happy if you have a disability. If you live with a disability, you are asexual and or uninterested in relationships and intimacy. Living with a disability makes you a hero. Okay, so that's just a helpful place for us to get going a little bit. Those are by no means the comprehensive sort of approach or grasp of all of the different myths that we've got out there when it comes to living with a disability, but very specifically, I think it's helpful for us just to kind of level the playing field. So today, we're really talking about the art of access. Access of thought, access of inclusion, access of physical space, access of looking at how do we ensure that the steps that we take through the work that you are doing as in the School of Public Health and beyond, I hope into the future, for you as an individual, what are the things that you can do on a daily basis to ensure that you are including, thinking about, planning for, preparing for individuals with disabilities before they ever come into a space or an interaction or a relationship with you. So this next slide that we've got here is a list of my mission. That is that we use the power of the creative arts to activate and amplify the voice and choice of individuals with disabilities. So before we proceed any further here, I want you all to use the chat. Feel free to click your cameras on. If you'd like to. It's great for me to be able to see live faces. It helps kind of bring a little bit of energy into the space. If you choose to keep them off, that's totally great. Sally, it's really great to see you as well. Hello, thank you. Tell me one choice that you've made today. Just go ahead and pop it in the chat or unmute yourself and give it a shout out. List a choice that you've made today. To drive to the grocery store, to eat a bagel for breakfast, you went to the office, you had lunch, to sleep in. Yes, to take a walk in the sunshine, to attend a virtual event, to get gas in your car, to take your dog for a walk, to read a book, to jumpstart your car. Sorry, Jeffrey, that sounds like a bummer and a choice you probably don't want to make, right? What you got to eat today, to eat chocolate chip cookies, absolutely. When we think about access, inclusion, and ensuring that folks with disabilities are a part of our communities, I think it really centers around choice. I think it centers around us remembering that an individual with a disability has total and complete control of their body and the choices that are involved in that. And whether they are supported by a web or a network of people that help support them in making those choices, the moment that we start to take away individual choices is the moment that we start to erode on an individual's capacity to be fully human and to live that full human experience. This is a lens of ableism that I think exists very quickly. We make choices about where folks get to live or work or receive opportunities for services on an ongoing basis with folks with disabilities. And I think the greatest thing that we can do is to remember choice. This is a powerful, powerful tool that you can do to disrupt ableism. So this work that I'm doing with my organization, Upstream Arts, began as really most, I think, things begin, and that is with my family. But bear with me here. I've got to just get back to my full screen. There we go. So this picture is of my stepson, Caleb, and my husband, Matt. And the two of them are sitting, kneeling on a beach, and they're kind of mirroring each other. So Caleb was born with pretty significant cognitive and developmental delays. He doesn't use words to communicate, but I'll tell you that on a daily, ongoing basis, Caleb is communicating. He is absolutely sharing his story and telling us what it is that he wants, but he's maybe not just using words to do that. So from a very, very young age, my husband, Matt, who is a dancer and an actor, used to take his son, Caleb, to dance rehearsal. And so Matt would be in the dance studio and Caleb would sit on the floor and watch the dancers move across the dance studio from left to right and right to left. And at one point, Caleb made the decision to start to mirror what they were doing. So Matt put his arms up in the air and then Caleb did the same. First Matt, then Caleb, then Matt, then Caleb. They were actually having a conversation. That conversation involved a give and a take, a choice that they got to make, a matching, and then a moving forward in dialogue. What we found from a really young age with our kid is that being able to find a shared language of communication was one of the greatest tools that we could have as a family to be able to make connection, to be able to have space and opportunity for our kid to be able to show and share us what it is that he wanted, who it is that he was, what are the things that he ultimately needed. And I think that as we think about ableism, I think one of the greatest barriers that we're bumping up against are all the different ways that we really minimize people's ability to be able to show, share, tell, articulate what it is, because we haven't discovered or don't make space for a shared language. Now, the practice as artists is that we have found the tools of the arts as the tool to do it. I think for you in the work that you were doing, how do you think about creativity, flexibility, and creating a space that is welcoming for people to ask for what they need, and to make sure that once somebody is there, you are going to creatively come up with a shared language or experience? That's disrupting. That is disrupting to the whole system that I think is currently in place, that is really serving as a way to oppress folks with disabilities within our society today. So this work then with our kid, where now we dance on a daily basis to check in and say hello and how are you doing? And actually, if we don't get that give and take exchange, we are finding that there's something going on with our son, Caleb. He lives in a group home now. He's been incredibly isolated from his peers and certainly from us as a family. But we find that within this Zoom space, even for the smallest of moments, our ability to come very close to the screen or very far away is an opportunity for us to still try and make that engagement and connection. So it wasn't just true, actually, this experience for our kid. We knew that there were other kids out there that ultimately could benefit probably from an arts experience, if I'm being perfectly honest, right? But then if we dig a little bit deeper, really looking at how do we explore the arts as this tool to help us share our stories and tell our truths, I think artists have done that on an ongoing basis. So on this purple slide that we've got here is this great photograph of one of our teaching artists who's sort of holding hand in hand with one of our students. Our work is facilitated through residency. So we meet with students or our adult community as well for an hour a week for a 12-week period of time. Our classes are facilitated by 3 teaching artists. We're teaching around a multitude of different topics. We do presentations, we have events, and we facilitate professional development. But very specifically, I think that we use theater, dance, poetry, music, visual arts as our really sort of fundamental approach. Because I think that the arts has this great capacity for us to create a shared language that moves beyond the verbal language and into something that ensures that an individual can help and be and work with and alongside something that is familiar, something that ensures that an individual with a disability has space, place, and opportunity to have a voice and to have as many choices as they can in who and how they want to live their lives. I think that this is such an important part of structural ableism in general, but is also just a great strategy. What are all of the ways that we are thinking about choice and ensuring that the choices of the community that we're working with and alongside are supported and served? For us, it is using the arts. And really, if we want to talk about it, it's using a practice of creativity and flexibility, okay? So we have 8 different program offerings that start with our babies, right? And I think that ableism is steeped from the very beginning. If I am a child that is born with a disability, immediately my experience is going to look different than what my peers the same age will be. When my son Caleb was born, the first thing that the doctor said to my husband when he handed him Caleb was, "There's not much good here." That was the very, very beginning of the work that was going to be asked of us and eventually of Caleb alongside us to start to dismantle what people felt like was a possibility of what he could do in his life. There's not much good here leaves a ton of room for us to prove somebody wrong. And it's a great thing to be able to do on a daily basis, if not exhausting, but really we like to undermine that doctor pretty regularly. How do we connect and bond with our children? And actually, how do we play with our children? If you are a child that is born with a disability out of the gate, is it about a medical appointment? Is it about what you cannot do? Is it about what the life expectancy might be? And what if we focused instead on play, on connecting, on bonding with one another, and oriented from that space. Is there an opportunity for us to get to know this person, this new human, a little bit better? And so this class that we do is with families, and it is with their children together. And one of my most favorite activities we do in this class is we share each other's soothing rhythms. We share each other's breaths, and we say, tell us the sound and what is the rhythm that you use to soothe your child. And then we all practice doing that together. And boy, does that just help significantly. My soothing rhythm is 4 breaths, 3 breaths at the beginning of every single thing. It's something that is still carried over. The art of social skills is something else that we do. And it's titled that really specifically because I think folks with disabilities are often asked, for you to be successful, you must be able to integrate into our communities. And you must have social skills that you can be successful in. But if you never have a space to practice the social skills that are asked of you to have because you are not integrated or included in our community, I would imagine your social skill capacity maybe is not very great because you've just not had a lot of opportunity to practice. And even more relevantly, an individual with a disability is often encouraged to be able to get out in the community and be community ready. But I think our community is not ready for individuals with disabilities to be able to show up and be successful. It is not ready in the built environment. It is not ready in our mindset of inclusivity. We are all out of practice. The art of social skills is not designed just for an individual with a disability. It is for the web of community that supports them and ensures that we all can be together in community. It is about leveraging a practice of creativity and flexibility. The art of working is another great place that we look at disrupting this ableism, right? These structures of what a workday looks like, what employment looks like. And I think getting a job, right, being a really big hurdle. But in truth, I think the art of employment comes from being able to keep that job. And that comes back to a social skill that I think we all need to have. So we spend time in the art of working doing that. The art of relationships is this other great place that we spend a lot of time with our community. If an individual with a disability is seen as being asexual, which they are, infantile or incapable of being able to have an intimate relationship, we open ourselves up for a reality that is significantly disturbing for folks with disabilities. An individual with a disability, with a cognitive or developmental disability, is 7 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. When I think about that epidemic that we have on our hands here, limiting people's access to education is probably a pretty significant flaw that we are playing out there. But never imagining that somebody gets to be in a relationship, somebody gets to feel love, somebody gets to look beyond the binary of gender, to be able to express, to be able to identify. We really are undermining that human experience that I am not denied on a regular basis. The art of relationships is as much about advocacy as it is about really knowing how we can lead our most self-determined lives through our bodily autonomy and understanding of ourselves. Voice and choice is another great advocacy opportunity to be able to show, share, and tell what it is that we want and need. And then grief, loss, and change, the newest of programs that we've offered. For all of these experiences, I think we're just denying folks the opportunity to have these lived experiences that you and I have. So grieving, losing somebody or something or an experience or experiencing significant change in our lives is a part of the human experience. And on an ongoing basis, I think ableism is really showing up when we deny the full human experience to folks with disabilities. And I think that's our response to that denial, is by looking at what are some ways we can drill down with our community and saying, you have the right, you have the choice. This is a part of everyday, everybody's experiences. It's natural to feel this way. There's no timeline on when these experiences need to show up or stop or begin. This is a part of the natural human experience here. So, that's a lot so far. How's everybody doing? I'm just going to click back to see you all. Thumbs up. Thanks, Ellen. I appreciate that input there. Thank you, Sally. Okay, good. I got a thumb up from Sarah. Wonderful. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Ashlyn. That's nice. Oh my gosh, thumbs up everywhere. Wonderful. Well, then in turn, I will just say thank you to that. I'm really super into these emojis, and Kelia, your heart is pretty great. I discovered though that, you know, if you put the raise hand up, you actually have to take your hand, you have to unraise it. I've sat through meetings where I've been like, why do they keep calling on me? And it's because, yeah, my hand is there. So you have to raise and lower. But good on you, Zoom. You're really making the world brighter, aren't you? Okay, we're going to jump back to the slide deck here if we can. So let's keep rolling. All right, so this photo here, this is an iceberg. Sometimes when people look at the photograph, they see it as a tooth. Not a tooth. It is an iceberg. And a third of the iceberg is out of the water and 2/3 of it is underneath the water. So when we think about disability, often we think about apparent disabilities, generally speaking, when we think about access and inclusion, mobility impairments, visual impairments, hearing impairments, right? These are what we would consider to be apparent disabilities. And they're not always, that's not always the case, but often accommodations, wheelchair accessible spaces, ensuring that maybe we've got Braille opportunities, ASL interpretation. So those are generally speaking the big disabilities that we tend to be focusing on. But what I think is really important is that 2/3 of individuals living with a disability live with a hidden disability. So learning disability, ADD, ADHD, autism, a traumatic brain injury, PTSD, mental illness. And I don't mean to sound trite as I read through this whole list here. The point really is very specifically, when we think about access and inclusion, and when we think about disrupting ableism, the reality is that the majority of folks that we need to be making accommodations for have a hidden disability, and you're never going to know that they have a disability. And you don't actually need to know to be able to ensure that you are creating a space where people feel welcome and feel like they have an opportunity and capacity to ask for what it is that they need. All right. So I'm going to give us some strategies and tools to be able to really think about how we can tee people up to be successful for asking what they need based on the community, culture, environment, experience that you are building from the beginning. So when we look at a building or a facility like this, as I mean, I think we see these buildings right on an ongoing basis all over university campuses, a huge flight of stairs, giant columns, big doors. It's meant to sort of evoke a very specific emotion of how you're supposed to feel, the level of importance you're supposed to have as you enter into the space. But as I'm sure you all looking and thinking, I hope right now, is unless you can climb the stairs, you cannot get into that building. And actually, the reality is that most of the time, these buildings were never built with the intention or thought of an individual with a disability or physical disability entering into that space. So we've started to retrofit those spaces, right? And what we've done is we've popped a nice long ramp on in the back. Okay, so that's is it progress? It's something, right? It's something. It's a suggestion of like, okay, we thought about you. We thought about you after we thought about everybody else. And the reality is that architects, which is kind of, this is the interesting part. Architects were like, listen, I don't want to build a building actually where I have to retrofit, and where in the end, the opportunity for people to be able to access that space is through something that looks like this on the back. Aesthetically, it's not pleasing, it's not the intention, right? So they came up with this architectural movement called universal design, all right? Now, universal design looks something like this. Practical, elegant, effective. It ensures that people can choose what they want, how they choose to get in and out of up and down through a space. I don't know, it's in Canada, so I don't know what that says about, it's Canadians. They're not always doing things better, but I'm Canadian. So anyways, the universal design piece is something that really, I think, not only does it support all sorts of different ways for people to be able to get in, get out of spaces, but it actually starts to set a tone or a culture for who you are and how you're willing to ensure that everybody does belong there. You thought about me. And not only did you think about me, you thought about me before I ever came into your space. Now, this is the idea of taking universal design, which is this architectural movement, and now moving it into our everyday culture. Universal design for teaching and learning is this great model that is used within our education system to think about how do we adapt, modify, and ensure that a slide like this, which is of these staircases with an embedded ramp that zigzags back and forth, ensuring that an individual with a mobility impairment or who just chooses to use a ramp can walk up or move up the space in the same space and structure as an individual that maybe chooses to use the stairs there. Choice is the most powerful option that we can be offering when it comes to access and inclusion and disruption of ableism within our communities here. So universal design, very specifically, how do we plan and how do we make sure we plan before anybody ever comes into the space? And then once folks are in the space or engaging with the content or curriculum or the experience, making sure that we are creative and flexible. If you build a beautiful ramp and you have everything that is fully accessible and the person comes into a space and they do not feel welcomed, none of it matters either. How do you think about not just ensuring that the built environment shows that you have access, but that you are building a culture of access within your communities? Because adding that layer of depth is where creativity and flexibility actually then can be deployed. Our ability to be able to predict every single need that somebody is going to have before they come into the space is neither sort of realistic or attainable. Our ability to be able to ensure that somebody feels welcome because the culture of access has been established, and then they have an opportunity to be able to ask very specifically for what it is that they need if it's not been made available already. That's, to me, the ultimate goal that we have. And that takes us all the way back to those myths that we were talking about at the beginning. I do not need to overcome. I am not sick. I am not a hero just by simply living with a disability. I can have a healthy, balanced, deep relationship. Because of my cognitive or developmental disability, I have fully lived the full years of my life. If I am a 30-year-old human, I should not be treated any less than that when it comes to my interactions and experiences with folks. There's all sorts of myths that are out there that we need to disrupt. Figuring out how you can invite a space where people feel welcome is just a great strategy, I think. Is this chat in is it just on my end or is it in front of the slide deck here? No, you can see. Good stuff. Okay, well, I'm just gonna keep moving. All right, we got a green slide here. And in the corner, it's the 101s. So these are just quick little tips here. When you think about physical space, notice it. Notice how the structures are set up with people with disabilities in mind. And even more importantly, how do people move into and out of spaces? Notice what that flow is and notice how it makes you feel. What's that feeling? You know, a good place to check some of these things out is like people that set up museums in many instances are really thinking about the traffic flow of humans moving through the space. And not always because of access, but because of the experience that they're hoping you will have. What if we layered on access on top of that thought of experience? And how would that ultimately help us? How would that help us ensure that everybody was feeling like they were really welcomed? So one of the things that Upstream Arts does is that we've created this, we've anchored ourselves in this acronym called SMILE, which is this, the big letters of the word smile are sprawled across my slide here. And then underneath it, I've got definitions for each of these elements that really this is a guide for us. People are always asking us, how do you support? How do you work? How are you inclusive of folks with disabilities? And beyond SMILE, which I would argue is a fabulous and powerful sort of point of access and inclusion, ensuring people feel welcome, how do we consider the sensory experience of an individual coming into a space? What's the lighting? What's the noise? What's the layout? What's the landscape, the visual landscape like when somebody comes into a space? Right? In an Upstream Arts class, we have music playing. The room is set up when we do classes in person. The room is set up always the same in a semicircle. There are chairs pulled for folks if they have their own chair and they're coming into the space, so they don't have to necessarily ask for, or they can make their choice for where they sit. There's not just one hole. That's the wheelchair spot. There's spaces for you to choose where you, the human, would like to be within that circle, in that space. We're creating an experience that we hope ensures that you feel welcome, and then you feel like you have an ability to be able to ask for what you need. We think a lot about how you move, and that's the M of SMILE, is movement. Ramps, elevators, aisles, accessible seating, parking. How do people move into and out of spaces? Identity and intersectionality, which I think it's at the heart of and in the middle of and really flanked by all the other elements of SMILE. Racial diversity, equity, gender, ability, disability. Often, if I am an individual living with a disability, I am associated with being one thing and one thing only, my disability. And the reality is that I am a complex, layered, multifaceted human being whose experiences live beyond just disability. And in many, many instances, disability is not how I define myself. It is how the community and the world around me defines myself. And in other instances, it is ultimately what I lead with. And that just depends on the individual and the choice that they are making about who they are and how they show up in the world. Language is this other fantastic tool and strategy. What are all of the options and ways that you are ensuring the information you are sharing is presented in multiple ways? I have a verbal prompt for you. I have a visual cue for you. And in the classes that we teach at Upstream Arts, there is an experiential space. I present information as many different ways as I can, ideally 3. What is the shared language that you are going to find beyond the verbal language? Because we're always communicating, right? For me as an Italian, I communicate with my eyebrows and I communicate with my hands, although not appropriate within this space. But I will say that that's one of the ways that I am letting people know how it is that I want them to interact with me. And then I think the final of SMILE, when I think about access and inclusion and this disruption of ableism, is experience. How do I ensure that I have space, place, and opportunity to have my own experiences, to be in community with and alongside folks with disabilities? First intentionally, and then ensuring that the spaces that I am creating, that I am facilitating, that I am a part of, are inclusive of our disability community and the expansiveness of our disability community. So SMILE is this great frame and way that I sort of layer on as I go through producing or creating any events. I really consider all of these 5 different elements as a great place for me to ensure that I'm thinking about access and inclusion of folks with disabilities. So that identity and intersectionality part, though, I think is a really fundamental piece. So this slide here is, again, a photo of my husband, Matt, and my stepson, Caleb, and they're sort of nestled up against each other at an event that we had. And, so Caleb, like I mentioned, lives in a group home. And in that group home, he has 3 other roommates, and then he is supported by a web of people in his life, a multitude of staff that come in and out on a daily basis. Caleb was taken out on an outing one day. They hopped in the car and they took Caleb for a drive. It tends to soothe him if he's feeling a little bit anxious. And when he came back to the house, the bedroom of one of his roommates was completely empty. She moved out, the furniture was gone, everything on the walls was taken off, all of the clothes were gone, she was gone. And Caleb went into her room and sat on the floor and he mourned his friend because nobody ever told him that she was going to move out and he didn't know what had happened. And it was in that moment that the staff realized that even if he has no ability to articulate or communicate, Caleb has every capacity to mourn and every capacity to feel the loss of somebody in his life that we must explain, and we must help him understand in all the ways we can do that, by letting him know that she's still okay, maybe taking him to her house, which is what they ultimately did, and say she lives here now. But they didn't think about that because Caleb doesn't use words to communicate, and so 90% of who he was as a human being was completely forgotten about and not thought of or accommodated. identity and intersectionality must be such a fundamental piece of consideration when we think about access, inclusion, ableism. A person with a disability is a person first, right? That's where all of our stories begin. And how then do we go from there to ensuring that folks with disabilities are included? So I'm going to keep carrying on here on my slide deck. I'm just going to jump back to that. And there we go. Sweet Caleb. I threw a picture of my other kid in the picture in the PowerPoint because they always get kind of annoyed that we don't share a photo of them. So that's our other child, Lillian. So it's really just for me to say, check her out. And you know, Caleb is a part of a family, right? So Caleb is a big brother, and Caleb has 4 parents. He's very fortunate to have 4 active, very verbal, very opinionated, well, one very opinionated parent for sure at that. You know, he is more than just one thing when it comes to his story, for sure. That's true also for my friend Jake, who is here and up on the stage. We have started to create theatrical productions where we can show, share, and tell our stories of folks with disabilities, where they can tell their own stories, and more importantly, where we can ensure that the stories that are missing, I think, from our communities, from the theater, from the television, from the arts in general. How do we ensure that our communities, where we always are unveiling and telling our stories through the arts, how do we ensure that there is space and place for that? When we first showed up at this theater, the theater really touted how accessible the theater was, with great accessible audience seating and audio descriptions and ASL interpretation, but the stage wasn't accessible. And so Jake, who is here in the middle of this photograph, wasn't able to ultimately be able to get onto the stage because they never imagined that Jake, or anybody else that might be like Jake, would be able to be a part of or be performing on their stage. So how are we disrupting this thought process here? How are we making sure that it doesn't all have to be an act of rebellion to ensure that people with disabilities are included, but it might be where we have to start right now. And I think that one of the greatest ways we can do that is, as artists, is we can disrupt the narrative here. And that's what I think we get to do on a daily basis, by creating these beautiful, beautiful moments of stories where people get to tell their own stories. And by ensuring that we are imagining beyond what we think is and who is typical and normal and regular when it comes to our performers, when it comes to our educators, when it comes to the people that are actually teaching us in the world. Because I think if we can consider and remember all the different ways that people take in information and communicate, if we can provide information in visual, spoken, and written formats, if we can assume the ability of folks from the moment that we are in an interaction with them, if we can really latch on to this attitude of access, and in my estimation, leveraging the arts and recognizing its capacity for advocacy, which is art in and of itself, I think if we can consider how each and every single one of us will smile, we can take things that we see on a daily basis that are intended to ensure that people's access or inclusion are there, but only through a very singular thought, right? If we can change just one thing, what happens when we make a transition? So I'm going to take the time now to answer any questions that you might have. But first, I'd just like to say thank you for being here and for sticking with me. It's just been it's really a great, great joy. So I'm going to open up the chat and feel free to unmute yourself. I think we've got just about 18 minutes, let's say, because I know you've got a couple of other things that you're going to want to get to. So any questions or thoughts or things you'd like to share?
I just want to start off, since I'm one of the hosts, that was just so great. And thank you for coming and sharing all of that with us. I was like, you might have seen me frantically like writing down some of those quotes and just like, and I just want to, again, say, anyone, if you have a chat, I can ask a question for you. You can unmute, but that was just fabulous. And I have this like this happy chest swelling feeling right now. I have this happy like, oh, right. You know, there are tools to make the world better. There are acronyms like SMILE that you can just make the world better and build it into everyday work. So just thank you. And I'm going to let other people, I'm going to give a little space to let other people ask questions though. And actually, so Emily just asked in the chat, could you share with us one of your favorite or most impactful moments from a performance or class?
Ooh, just one, Emily. Oh, it's so good. I always try and have these sort of like mini mission moments of things that have popped up in our class. So, so recently we've had the pleasure of being able to take our sex positive sex education classes into high schools with Minneapolis Public Schools. So those art of relationships classes have mostly been done with our adult community, and through a grant through the Minnesota Department of Health, we've been able to bring it down to a younger audience there. And one of the things that we get to do is we get to kind of come up with a dance move for our safety rules, is what we call them. My body belongs to me. No one can touch you without your permission. Your body belongs to you. And so I'll tell you that to me, there is no greater realization of a lesson learned than when I have a sea of 15 students, some of them that are like laying in their bedroom and others that are like jumping around, when they start to do their dance move about my body belongs to me. So it began with like a thumb. And if you are Seinfeld fans, I'm always trying to work Elaine's dance move actually into the dance, but if that's not a reference, that makes sense. So my body belongs to me. So just try that on and see what ultimately happens here. And then your body belongs to you. That moment for so many in our classes, I mean, I'm sad to say that it's news in many instances, but it's news that is being received in that moment. It's a favorite of mine. It's a favorite when people recognize and realize their own power within themselves. So thank you for that. Share a bit of insight into your experience of the intersection of race and ability. Yeah. Well, obviously, I don't have a personal experience. I can tell you what I have observed as someone that really feels like we need to not only dismantle ableism, but the systemic oppression that exists within our communities. That certainly exists within the organization that I run as a white-run organization, and the embedded sort of implicit bias that exists there. What we see is that individuals with disabilities that are experience disability at higher percentages if you are a person of color. That is a reality that we are seeing on a regular basis. There is systemic racism that is embedded in our education system. For individuals, particularly students that are Black and brown boys, we see them really being impacted quite significantly by not necessarily receiving the exact right services that are aligning with the needs that they ultimately have. And I think that systemic racism that exists within our school district and exists in our society as a whole is conflated when it comes to disability. And I think that as we think about and work towards having an attitude and a culture of access, we have to think about that intersectional experience as being as critical as recognizing what we need to do to disrupt ableism, because it's all of these experiences are conflated in many terms. So and that's just kind of one thing. My colleague Bree, who is our associate director with Upstream Arts, is amazing and awesome and is here with us as well. Bree, I don't know if you want to add or a thought or anything to that as well. I'm going to ask you to jump in here.
Yeah, I think what Julia was referring to is a very systemic intersection that we encounter a lot. And Julia always gives the example of a young person with a disability is more often to have that disability called autism if they're white, and more often if they are Black or brown for it to be called emotional behavioral disability. So you can see the loaded information and language that has, and that there is kind of a noted pipeline to the prison system that goes along with that we see. So that's one of the biggest intersections in the education realm, definitely. And then in daily life, I think that plays out for people beyond the education system, that behaviors are thought of as something that come from a racial identity rather than from a disability. So that's one of the biggest codes to crack, and we all have to keep remembering and thinking, why was that person labeled that? Or why are we deciding that person can't be in a traditional classroom? And evaluate the systems for evaluation, the systems for diagnosis. So that's the most key.
I mean, I think that we talk a lot about, and I think, you know, educationally, we are starting to hear the narrative that special education is a service, not a place. And you know, so these, even as we start to make these shifts in language, we start to shift away from the identity being so singular and moving beyond it to trying to really understand what it is that, what are the services and supports that an individual might need versus being diagnosed very specifically with, you are special ed. And I think that you know, we're seeing some progress. I know that there is conversation, at least there's some acknowledgement that is out there. It's by no means where we need to ultimately be. And this sort of interesting view that we have as an organization, because we are working with individuals with disabilities from birth all the way through to sort of retirement, is that the systems of oppression are alive and well in our education system. We see it every day with those 100 partners that we're working with. And we see some really great educators that are doing some great work, but you know, that doesn't erase much. So,
I have another point I could make, if that's fine.
Yeah, go for it.
In terms of disability, the percentage of people who have disability is disproportionately higher that they are of color or below income in the Twin Cities. And that's often because how that's evaluated is the census will ask, like, is there something that limits your life function right now? And if you say yes, you have a disability. So if you think about being low income, if you think about being from historically disenfranchised communities, you can see how your life is limited by something that if you had more resources, if you had a different background, it wouldn't be. So that's how that conflation happens between historical inequities. You know, if you can afford a certain assistive technology device, you can afford certain services, that disability essentially doesn't limit your life function, just in the same way, if you can afford glasses, your vision doesn't limit your life function. So that's another place where you really see how other oppressions interact with ableism.
Okay, let's see, Devin, in terms of the intersection of race and ability, as a white, invisibly disabled person, I've appreciated the lens of disability justice, which acknowledges the nature of white supremacy and how that gives rise to ableism. More info can be found there. Yeah, thanks for bringing up this stuff. And Sins Invalid is such a great organization doing really great, really great, long admired work that we're huge fans of, for sure. So thanks for bringing that piece up, right? I guess I would also just share that, you know, the artists are always telling our stories, right? And I think that we have to define or redefine who gets to be an artist and what makes an artist and what is art and all of these other pieces there, right? And we've done a great job of sort of scrubbing it into sort of really tidy little boxes to ensure that only certain people can and are and represent sort of our arts and artistic community. And when you do that, you really start to sort of erode the stories of people. Artists are always been the storytellers of our lives here. So how do we think about making sure that spaces that we are creating and building ensure that people can tell their stories, their whole stories, not to oversimplify it, but I will tell you that if I feel welcome as I go into a space, my ability to be creative and flexible changes pretty dramatically. So the systemic racism is significant and alive and well, and my own white privilege ensures that there are many, many experiences that I do not have to live through. But if you walk down the road with myself and my son and my husband, and you experience the blatant discrimination that we have felt as families walking through the world, we realize that every single one of us possesses some kind of ability to really be oppressive in some way, shape, or form. And I think that it gets layered and layered and more complicated the more in that intersectional experience, for sure. So it's a lot of work, and I think it's beautifully told through the stories and through the art that is out there. So we have 4 minutes. Is that right, Kelia?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm actually, I'm in the chat. I'm gonna start dumping a few announcements just to make sure that we have as many opportunities to talk as possible. And I just, this is more of a comment than a question, but of everything you said in that wonderful presentation, I think the quote that is still just spinning in my head right now is, "You thought about me before I even came into this space." And just like that is just, I'm really feeling that right now because obviously very impactful for the disabled community. And like, I think your example of there was disabled access for the audience, but not for the stage in the theater. That was so telling. And I think just that as a principle, like I want to get that tattooed on my arm so I can look at it every morning, but just like, who is being thought of and who isn't being thought of in this space, in this activity.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, you know, I think every person interested in public health should make a commitment to that, of just, we're gonna try to do this. We're gonna try to make it so people who are too often excluded and ignored, they can walk in and know you thought of me already. Because I just, again, that's what is circling in my head. That's my little comment. And I'm just, to make sure I get some of my announcements before we run out of time. Because gosh,
can I just,
yes, please.
Can I add one thing to that? So first, I would encourage you not to try. I would encourage you to do it. And I would encourage also that the experience of universal design is a practice. So ensuring that you get it perfect every single time is not the goal. Otherwise, you will never do it. Just do it. Start doing it and fail as many times as you possibly can, because then I know that you are ultimately trying. I think that's an option to have out there for sure. Yeah, that's all. I think it's time for your announcements. I think I'm gonna mute myself.
I think that,
sometimes it's the best way to get me to wrap up.
Oh gosh, yes. So I'm just gonna post a couple links in the chat. One that's amazing, and yes. So if you haven't registered already and you are free, literally, 4 minutes from now, there is going to be a conversation with Mayor Melvin Carter of St. Paul. I just posted the registration link in there. Our next structural oppression seminar will be 2 Fridays from now, on March 5th. And again, I posted the link for that. And also next week, probably should have done this in date order, but next Thursday, I believe, the 25th, our diversity, equity, and inclusion team here at the School of Public Health are having a session to talk about our strategic plan draft for the School of Public Health. And Gail, if you want to mention anything since you're on the call, please hop on. But the registration link is in there. It's so important to have community and student voices there, as we make the School of Public Health better going forward. And yeah, just, you know, thank you to everyone who has attended. Thank you again to Julie. This was just so meaningful. And to any students who are on right now, yeah, I'm gonna throw a clap and a heart because that was just so great. And my kitty has to have a show up at the very end. To any students who are on right now, if there's any way that the School of Public Health Student Senate can support you, please reach out to us. And just if you are interested in getting involved in the amazing diversity and equity and inclusion work that Gail, who is on, and also Lauren Eldridge are doing, you know, reach out to them. Our team is just fantastic and they do so much work, and a lot of it's behind the scenes. A lot of it isn't visible, but my goodness, we're so lucky to have champions like them. And we just have a couple minutes and I think people are logging off, but just really thank you to everyone who participated. And Julie, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the work you do. And thank you for sharing your work and your passion and your insight and expertise with us. I'm just so very grateful. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording.